The warning came too late. "Don't press send!" she had cried out, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. But his finger had already tapped the screen, launching $900 million worth of regret into cyberspace. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The tension in the conference room on the 42nd floor of Langford Tower was palpable. Philip Langford, CEO of the billion-dollar empire that bore his name, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, his finger hovering over the send button. The email draft displayed on the large screen behind him contained language that would effectively declare corporate war against Maid Corp, terminating negotiations that had stretched over 18 months. "Gentlemen, ladies," Philip announced, his voice carrying the weight of authority earned over 3 decades. "Once I send this, there's no turning back. Maid has consistently undermined our position, and these latest reports confirm their duplicity." The 12 executives seated around the table nodded in solemn agreement. A deal worth $900 million was about to evaporate, but principles mattered in this room. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the New York skyline, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Sir, please wait." The voice came from the doorway, unexpected and unwelcome. Isabella de la Cruz stood there, clutching a flash drive in her trembling hand. The 24-year-old daughter of Maria de la Cruz, the building's head maid, had never set foot in the executive suite before today. Her presence was an anomaly that immediately drew scoffs and raised eyebrows. "How did you get past security?" demanded Carter Langford, Philip's son, rising from his seat with barely contained indignation. "The reports are wrong," Isabella said, ignoring Carter and addressing Philip directly. "The data you're basing your decision on has been manipulated." Laughter rippled through the room. One executive whispered audibly, "The cleaning staff is giving business advice now." Philip raised his hand for silence, curiosity momentarily overriding protocol. "Young lady, you have 30 seconds. Isabella stepped forward, her simple clothes a stark contrast to the bespoke suits surrounding her. "May I?" she asked, indicating the computer. With reluctant permission granted, she inserted the flash drive. The screen filled with comparative data sets, the official reports side by side with raw server logs she had extracted during night shifts while helping her mother. "These discrepancies appeared 3 days ago," she explained, highlighting numbers that didn't match. Someone inside Langford Global altered the Maid compliance reports. The room fell silent as Philip leaned forward, color draining from his face as he studied the evidence. What had seemed like justified outrage minutes before now appeared to be a carefully orchestrated sabotage. "Who else knows about this?" Philip asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just my mother," Isabella replied. "And whoever did this." Philip's finger, which had hovered over potential destruction, now pressed the delete button instead. He looked at Isabella with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "It seems," he said slowly, addressing the suddenly uncomfortable executives, "we have a traitor among us." The silence in the boardroom was deafening. Philip Langford's finger hovered over the send button, trembling slightly before he finally pulled his hand away from the keyboard. The color had drained from his face as he stared at the fabricated reports Isabella de la Cruz had just exposed. He closed his laptop with a decisive click that echoed through the room. "Who authorized this?" Philip demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. The executives who had been snickering at Isabella moments before now shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. "I want answers. Now." No one spoke. The gravity of what had nearly happened settled over the room like a heavy fog. The Maid Corp deal, worth $900 million, had been seconds away from collapse based on falsified information. "Do you all understand what just happened?" Philip's voice rose as he stood, palms flat against the polished table. "This young woman just saved this company from financial suicide and potential litigation that would have lasted years." Isabella stood quietly by the door, clutching her flash drive, acutely aware of the hostile glances from several executives. She had never imagined being in this room, let alone becoming the center of attention within it. After dismissing his team, Philip approached Isabella with a mixture of gratitude and calculation in his eyes. "Miss de la Cruz, I believe we owe you more than thanks. I'd like to offer you a temporary position in our data analysis department." Isabella blinked in surprise. "Sir, I'm not sure "It's not charity," he interrupted. "It's self-preservation. You found something my entire team missed. I need that kind of attention to detail." Later that evening, Isabella explained everything to her mother in their small apartment kitchen. Maria de la Cruz listened silently, her hands methodically chopping vegetables for dinner, but her eyes betrayed her concern. "Mija, be careful," Maria finally said, setting down her knife. "These are powerful people. They don't like being embarrassed, especially by someone they consider beneath them." "I'll be fine, Mama," Isabella assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "This is an opportunity I can't pass up." Maria wiped her hands on her apron, the same one she wore while cleaning the executive floors of Langford Tower. "Those people smile while holding knives behind their backs. I've watched them for 15 years. Isabella squeezed her mother's hand. "I'll be careful. I promise." What neither of them could see was how this single moment would thrust Isabella from the shadows into a dangerous spotlight. In accepting Philip's offer, she had unknowingly stepped onto a chessboard where she was both the newest piece and a potential sacrifice. The game had only just begun. The first envelope arrived 3 days after Isabella de la Cruz started her new position. Maria found it wedged between utility bills, its official-looking letterhead almost convincing enough. Almost. The overdue payment notice contained no actual account numbers, just a message typed in small font at the bottom. "Tell your daughter to stay quiet." Maria's hands trembled as she placed it on their small kitchen table. By the third notice, the trembling had turned to fear. Each message grew more specific, mentioning Isabella's movements through Langford Tower, even describing what she wore to work. The latest one arrived with a grainy photo of their apartment building's entrance. "Mama, they're just trying to scare us," Isabella said, though her voice betrayed her own uncertainty. She sat across from her mother, their modest apartment feeling suddenly exposed. The security they'd carefully built over years, Maria's steady position, their tight-knit community, the scholarships Isabella had earned, now seemed paper-thin. "This is not a game, Mija," Maria whispered, clutching her rosary. "These people, they have money, power. We have nothing." "We have the truth," Isabella countered, reaching for her mother's hand. "And that's worth protecting." Despite her brave words, Isabella lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The threats weren't just endangering her mother. They confirmed her suspicions. Someone at Langford Global was desperate to silence her, which meant she was getting closer to something important. The next morning, Isabella arrived at work an hour early. The tower stood quiet, most executives not yet arrived. She used her new access card to enter the data center, a labyrinth of servers humming with the secrets of a billion-dollar empire. Her temporary position gave her just enough clearance to begin mapping the company's information architecture. She created a private folder on her workstation, hidden behind layers of encryption she'd learned from online forums. Inside, she began documenting everything: the manipulated reports she'd discovered, the timeline of events leading to Philip's near-disastrous email, and now, the threats against her family. "Someone went to extraordinary lengths to sabotage that deal," she murmured to herself, scanning through financial projections that had been subtly altered. "But why?" Isabella glanced over her shoulder as the elevator dinged in the distance. The early bird executives would be arriving soon. She quickly closed her files and switched to her assigned work. As she pretended to review quarterly reports, her mind raced through possibilities. The attack had been sophisticated, requiring both technical skill and intimate knowledge of Langford's operations. Whoever was behind it had access, authority, and motive, a dangerous combination. The threats against her mother only strengthened Isabella's resolve. If they wanted her silent, it meant she was on the right track. She would find the source of the attack, not just to protect Langford Global, but to ensure her family's safety. Isabella de la Cruz stared at her computer screen, her eyes burning from hours of scrutinizing spreadsheets. 3 days into her temporary data assistant position at Langford Global, and she'd already found something disturbing. Small inconsistencies in the quarterly reports, a decimal point shifted here, a transposed number there, created a pattern too deliberate to be coincidental. "This isn't random," she whispered to herself, jotting notes on her smartphone. The discrepancies were masterfully crafted, just small enough to fly under the radar of standard auditing protocols, yet significant enough that, when combined, they redirected millions of dollars through a labyrinth of subsidiary accounts. The young woman clicked through another folder, heart racing as she discovered more altered documents. Someone with high-level access had systematically manipulated financial data for at least 6 months. The same someone who had nearly tricked Philip into sending that catastrophic email to Myogen Corp. Isabella glanced up as Carter Langford strode past her temporary workstation, his expensive cologne lingering in the air. The CEO's son nodded curtly, his charming smile not quite reaching his eyes. She returned to her screen, keeping her expression neutral despite the unease crawling up her spine. "Working late again, Ms. de la Cruz?" he asked, pausing by her desk. "Just getting familiar with the system, sir," she replied, discreetly minimizing her screen. After he disappeared around the corner, Isabella exhaled slowly. Her temporary security badge gave her unprecedented access to company data, but it also made her visible, a stark contrast to her previous invisibility as the head maid's daughter. That evening, Isabella called her mother from a quiet corner of the lobby. "Mama, I might be late again tonight," she said in hushed tones. "Be careful, mija," Maria de la Cruz warned. "These are powerful people. They don't like being challenged." "I know," Isabella replied, watching executives filter out through the revolving doors. "But someone nearly destroyed this company, and they're still here, still working." After hanging up, she returned to her workstation, contemplating her next move. The manipulation was sophisticated. She needed allies who understood Langford Global's complex systems. Perhaps Tariq from maintenance, who had helped her access the backup servers yesterday. He seemed trustworthy, and his technical knowledge was impressive. Isabella saved her findings to her personal flash drive, tucking it securely in her pocket. She needed a strategy, ways to gather evidence without alerting. Whoever was behind this, the irony wasn't lost on her. Days ago, she'd been invisible, serving coffee to executives who never learned her name. Now, she was hunting for a corporate saboteur while potentially becoming their next target. As she gathered her things to leave, Isabella glanced at the imposing portrait of Philip Langford in the hallway. She had prevented one disaster, but something told her the real battle was just beginning. Carter Langford strode through the glass doors of Langford Tower with the easy confidence of a man who owned the place, or soon would. Fresh from his extended stay in Geneva, the CEO's son carried himself with the polished elegance of European tailoring and old money. His arrival, ostensibly to support his father during the company's turbulent time, was met with whispers and sidelong glances from employees who hadn't seen him in months. "Dad," he announced, embracing Philip with practiced warmth in the executive suite. "I came as soon as I heard about the Myojin situation." His smile never reached his eyes as they swept across the room, landing briefly on Isabella, who stood quietly organizing data reports. Within 48 hours of his return, Isabella found her security clearance mysteriously downgraded. Access to financial databases she'd been using to trace the data manipulation suddenly required additional authorization. When she attempted to log into the company's transaction records, a message flashed. "Access denied, clearance level insufficient." Strange timing, Isabella murmured to herself, watching Carter through the glass walls of the conference room as he charmed a group of younger board members. She noticed how they leaned toward him, nodding at his every word. Philip seemed to age overnight as tensions mounted between factions forming within the company. The older executives, loyal to the CEO for decades, huddled in concerned groups while Carter cultivated allegiance among the newer, ambitious directors. The division was as clear as the 60-story drop outside the tower windows. "Miss de la Cruz," Carter said, catching Isabella alone in the break room. "My father speaks highly of your fortunate intervention." His tone made the compliment sound like an accusation. "But corporate security is a delicate matter. We're implementing new protocols to protect sensitive information." Isabella met his gaze steadily. "Of course. Security is precisely why I'm here." That evening, Maria noticed her daughter's troubled expression as Isabella picked at her dinner. "What's wrong, mija?" she asked, setting down a glass of water. "Carter Langford returned today," Isabella replied, "and suddenly doors are closing all around me." Maria's face tightened with concern. "Be careful, Isabella. Men like that, they don't forget when someone challenges them." Later that night, Isabella attempted one last remote login to the company servers from her laptop. To her surprise, a hidden backdoor access point remained open, one Philip had authorized personally. She began downloading what files she could, working against time and instinct. Carter's arrival was no coincidence. It was a countermove in a game she was only beginning to understand. The question wasn't whether Carter was involved, but how deeply and what he stood to gain from nearly destroying his father's company. The fluorescent lights of Langford Tower had long dimmed when Isabella de la Cruz found herself alone in the data center. The building hummed with the quiet energy of servers, a digital heartbeat that never ceased. 3 weeks into her temporary position, she'd developed a habit of working late, partly to avoid Carter's watchful eyes and partly because the night shift offered uninterrupted access to the company's digital infrastructure. Tonight, she was exploring an old backup server that hadn't been properly indexed. Most employees didn't even know it existed, but Tariq had mentioned it during one of their hushed conversations by the maintenance closet. Some things never get fully erased, he'd told her with a knowing look. Isabella's fingers moved methodically across the keyboard, her screen reflecting in her tired eyes. A folder labeled EchoSeed 2018 caught her attention, not because of its name, but because of its unusual permission settings. It required administrator credentials that hadn't been updated in years. Using a workaround she'd learned from her grandfather, Isabella bypassed the security protocol. The folder expanded, revealing hundreds of documents, technical specifications, meeting minutes, and most importantly, patent applications. "What the hell?" she whispered, scrolling through files that detailed a revolutionary artificial intelligence framework. According to the documents, EchoSeed was a joint venture between Langford Global and Myogin Corp., the very company Philip had nearly declared war against. But what made her blood run cold was the name listed as co-registrant on the patent application, Carter Langford. Isabella leaned back in her chair, pieces falling into place. Carter hadn't just returned to support his father through a crisis. He had orchestrated it. The fabricated reports that nearly tanked the $900 million deal weren't meant to protect Langford Global. They were designed to sabotage it. She downloaded the files to her personal device, heart pounding. This wasn't just corporate espionage. It was family betrayal. Carter had been playing both sides, positioning himself to benefit regardless of the outcome. The young woman glanced at her watch. Almost 3 a.m. She needed to tell Philip, but she also needed to be careful. If Carter discovered she knew about EchoSeed, her temporary position might become permanently terminated. As she shut down the computer, Isabella realized the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about saving a deal anymore. It was about uncovering a conspiracy years in the making. Her mother's warnings echoed in her mind. Some worlds aren't meant for people like us. But Isabella was already in too deep. With each revelation, the invisible line connecting past decisions to the present crisis became clearer and more dangerous to follow. The summer air hung heavy over the Hamptons estate as Langford Global's most influential shareholders gathered for their annual retreat. Isabella de la Cruz stood awkwardly at the periphery, her temporary data assistant badge, drawing curious glances from the wealthy attendees who were more accustomed to seeing her mother cleaning their offices than joining their meetings. "Keep the staff out of the presentation room," Carter Langford whispered to the event coordinator, loud enough for Isabella to hear. The young executive adjusted his tailored jacket with practiced nonchalance, flashing smiles at board members while systematically ensuring she remained invisible. Philip had insisted on her presence, but his son had other plans. Isabella found herself relegated to the back row as Carter took center stage to unveil the company's new artificial intelligence platform, the cornerstone of Langford Global's $900 million partnership with Myogin Corp. "This revolutionary software will transform how we process financial data," Carter announced to enthusiastic applause. The demonstration began with sleek visualizations displaying what appeared to be flawless code execution. Isabella noticed it immediately, inconsistencies in the processing algorithms that would cause catastrophic failures within months. She scribbled calculations on her notepad, heart racing. This wasn't just a minor bug, it was fundamentally broken. When Carter called for questions, Isabella raised her hand. He pointedly ignored her until Philip nodded in her direction, forcing his son's acknowledgement. "The integration protocols are incompatible with your current security framework," she stated, her voice steady despite the tension. "May I demonstrate?" Reluctantly, Carter yielded the presentation device. With swift keystrokes, Isabella bypassed the demonstration mode and accessed the actual code structure. The screen suddenly filled with error messages and failed sequences. "These aren't just surface glitches," she explained, highlighting specific sections. "The core architecture will collapse under real-world data loads." The room fell silent. Several board members leaned forward, expressions shifting from dismissal to concern. One elderly shareholder removed his glasses, squinting at the evidence. "How did we miss this?" Philip asked, his authoritative voice tinged with both anger and relief. Carter's charming facade cracked momentarily. "A minor setback we're already addressing," he countered, but the damage was done. As the meeting adjourned, Isabella felt a mix of triumph and dread. She had proven her worth, but the venomous glare Carter shot her way promised consequences. His allies, 2 junior executives and Philip's assistant, huddled around him, whispering urgently. "You did well," Philip told her quietly. "But watch your back. Not everyone appreciates being saved from their mistakes." Walking back to her temporary quarters, Isabella noticed a company car following at a distance. The battle for Langford Global's future had just escalated, and she was now unmistakably in the crosshairs. Isabella de la Cruz's phone rang as she was leaving Langford Tower after another late night of investigation. The panicked voice of Tariq sent her racing to the 32nd floor. "Chemical spill," he said. "Your mother." She found Maria de la Cruz surrounded by concerned cleaning staff, struggling to breathe after inhaling fumes from what maintenance reports would later call an accidental mixing of cleaning agents. Isabella knew better. Her mother had been using the same products for 15 years without incident. "This wasn't an accident," Isabella whispered to Tariq as paramedics loaded her mother into the ambulance. The technician nodded grimly, having already checked the security footage that showed someone had tampered with the cleaning supplies. At the hospital, Maria clutched her daughter's hand with surprising strength despite the oxygen mask covering her face. The harsh fluorescent lights made her look older, more vulnerable. "You must stop," Maria whispered when they were alone. "This is their warning. Next time." She couldn't finish the sentence, but her eyes conveyed everything words couldn't. "Mama, I can't just walk away," Isabella said, though her voice trembled. "What they're doing is wrong. And what about us? What happens to our family when you're gone?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "I came to this country to give you opportunities, not to lose you to these powerful people's games." That night, Isabella sat in the hospital corridor, her grandmother's rosary wrapped around her fingers. The weight of her mother's fear pressed against her chest. Perhaps Maria was right. She was just one person against a corporate empire. What difference could she really make? Her phone buzzed with a message from Philip Langford. "How is your mother?" "Hospital bills taken care of." "We need to talk." Isabella stared at the screen, anger rising. This was exactly what they wanted. To scare her into silence, to remind her of her place. The chemical accident was no coincidence, coming right after she'd discovered the EchoSeed files. She thought of the cleaning staff who had rallied around her mother, the same invisible workers who moved through Langford Tower, noticing everything while being noticed by no one. She thought of Tariq, risking his position to help her, and she thought of her mother, who had taught her that dignity wasn't something others could take unless you surrendered it. By morning, when Maria's breathing had stabilized, Isabella had made her decision. The attack on her mother hadn't weakened her resolve. It had crystallized it. They had made this personal, and now she would see it through to the end. "I'm going to be careful, Mama," she promised, kissing her mother's forehead. "But I'm not going to be afraid." The dim light of Philip Langford's private office cast long shadows across the mahogany furniture as the CEO gestured for Isabella de la Cruz to take a seat. These clandestine meetings had become their ritual over the past 2 weeks. Always after hours, always with the security cameras temporarily looped. "Finding truth is only the beginning," Philip said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Making people believe it. That's the real battle." Isabella nodded, absorbing his words as she had absorbed everything since that fateful day in the conference room. The older man had become an unexpected mentor, teaching her the unwritten rules of corporate warfare with the patience of someone who'd fought these battles for decades. "Your technical skills are exceptional," he continued, "but board members don't respond to data alone. They respond to narrative, to confidence, to the person presenting the information." The young woman took notes meticulously. Each evening she would return to the modest apartment she shared with her mother, Maria, and study these lessons as diligently as she had once studied for college exams. "Carter knows how to tell a story that people want to believe," Philip said, his voice tinged with regret when mentioning his son. "That's what makes him dangerous." Isabella looked up from her notebook. "Is that why you're helping me?" "Because of Carter." The CEO's eyes reflected decades of difficult decisions. "I'm helping you because you remind me of what Langford Global was built to be. Innovative, ethical, forward-thinking." He paused, staring at the family portrait on his desk. "My son sees the company as his inheritance. You see it as a responsibility." Their conversations ranged from financial strategy to corporate psychology, with Philip sharing insights that executives paid consultants millions to hear. He taught her how to read between the lines of quarterly reports, how to identify the subtle power dynamics in a boardroom, and, most importantly, how to present evidence in ways that couldn't be dismissed. "Something's coming," Philip confided one evening, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. "Changes that will reshape this company's future." Isabella sensed the weight behind his words. What kind of changes? He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. The kind that requires someone with both technical expertise and moral courage. The CEO straightened his tie, a gesture Isabella had come to recognize as his preparation for difficult conversations. Someone unlike anyone currently in the executive suite. As Isabella left the office that night, she felt both empowered and burdened by his implicit trust. The cleaning staff nodded respectfully as she passed. Her mother had ensured they knew she remained one of them, despite her new position. What neither Isabella nor Philip noticed was the shadow that moved behind the frosted glass door. Someone who had been listening, someone who understood exactly what these meetings meant for the future of Langford Global. Isabella de la Cruz stared at her computer screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Something wasn't right. The surveillance footage from the night the fabricated email was created should have been there, but instead she found only empty folders and error messages. Deleted, she whispered to herself. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. She pulled out her phone and texted Tariq, hoping he was still in the building. The maintenance technician had been her friend since her days wandering Langford Tower with her mother during evening cleaning shifts. Within minutes, he appeared at her office door, tool belt slung over his shoulder. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, closing the door behind him. "More like I'm looking for ghosts," Isabella replied. "The security footage from last Thursday is gone, completely wiped." Tariq scratched his chin thoughtfully. "The main server backs up to secondary storage every 48 hours. If someone deleted it recently, we might still find fragments." Isabella finished his thought. For the next 3 hours, they worked in silence, Isabella navigating the company's digital architecture, while Tariq connected her to backup systems normally inaccessible to anyone below executive level. His position gave him access to the physical infrastructure of the building, including the server rooms that most employees never saw. "There," Tariq pointed at the screen around midnight. "That's the backup cache." Isabella's eyes widened as fragmented video files appeared on her screen. "You're a miracle worker." The footage was incomplete, just 4 separate clips totaling 7 minutes, but it was enough. The timestamps matched the exact period when the falsified reports were uploaded to Philip's email drafts. The grainy images showed someone moving through the executive suite, accessing Philip's computer, and leaving without ever showing their face to the camera. "They knew where the blind spots were," Tariq observed. Isabella nodded grimly. "This wasn't an outside hack. Look at how they used Philip's executive override code." She pointed to the keyboard sequence. "That's not public knowledge. This has to be someone from the inside, someone with high-level clearance." As they pieced together the fragments, a disturbing picture emerged. The perpetrator had used an executive keycard, moved with confidence through the building's security protocols, and knew exactly which cameras to avoid. "Whoever did this," Isabella said, saving the recovered footage to her flash drive, "they're not just after money. This is personal. They wanted to destroy Philip and the company in one move." Tariq looked at her with concern. "Be careful, Isabella. People with that kind of access and that kind of motivation." "I know," she replied, clutching the flash drive. "They're the most dangerous kind." Isabella de la Cruz's heart pounded against her ribs as she stared at her computer screen. The whistleblower email had appeared in her inbox just minutes ago, a carbon copy of a message scheduled to automatically send to the entire board of directors, major shareholders, and several financial journalists in exactly 72 hours. "I, Isabella de la Cruz, hereby confess to deliberately sabotaging the Myogen Core deal through fabricated data." The message continued with horrifying precision, detailing how she had allegedly orchestrated the entire crisis to gain employment at Langford Global. The young woman's hands trembled as she scrolled through the document. Someone had meticulously constructed her downfall, complete with doctored timestamps of her accessing sensitive servers and fabricated communications between her and supposed co-conspirators. Whoever crafted this frame-up knew exactly what they were doing. The evidence looked damning. "This can't be happening," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. The Langford Tower's 43rd floor was nearly empty this late in the evening, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Isabella took a deep breath and forced herself to think strategically, just as Philip had been teaching her. The timing wasn't coincidental. The email would detonate during the annual general meeting, when all key decision-makers would be gathered in one room. The perfect moment for maximum damage. She copied the message to her personal device and began dissecting its metadata. The originating server belonged to a subsidiary company she'd never heard of, but the coding style felt familiar. The trap had been laid with the same subtle fingerprints as the original sabotage attempt she'd uncovered weeks ago. Her thoughts turned to her mother. If this email sent, Maria would lose her position as head maid, a job she'd held with dignity for 15 years. Their modest apartment, her mother's health care benefits, everything would vanish overnight. The De La Cruz name would be synonymous with corporate espionage. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Are you coming home soon?" "I made your favorite soup." The simple message nearly broke her. How could she tell Maria that they were both about to be destroyed? She closed her eyes, clutching the edge of her desk. 3 days, 72 hours, to unravel a conspiracy that had likely been months in the making. The digital trail would lead somewhere. It had to. And when she found the source, she would discover who wanted her silenced so desperately. "I'm not going down without a fight," she muttered, fingers already flying across the keyboard. Whoever had set this trap didn't understand one crucial thing. They weren't dealing with just any whistleblower. They were dealing with the daughter of Maria de la Cruz, who had taught her that justice always found a way. Isabella de la Cruz stared at her computer screen, the clock in the corner ticking past midnight. 3 days until the whistleblower email would send, framing her for the sabotage. Her eyes burned from hours of searching for a way into the encrypted server where she suspected the real evidence was hidden. "Think," she whispered to herself, rubbing the tension from her neck. The password prompts had defeated every standard hacking technique she knew. Then, like a distant melody, she remembered her grandfather sitting beside her on their worn couch, teaching her Spanish rhymes that concealed numeric patterns. "Numbers have rhythm, Isa," he'd told her, his weathered hands guiding hers. "People choose passwords with patterns they can remember, dates, sequences that feel right in their hearts." The young woman pulled out her notebook and began writing the Spanish counting rhymes her abuelo had taught her. She applied the pattern to the executive birth dates listed in the company directory, focusing on Carter Langford's information. "Una, dos y tres," she murmured, translating the rhythm into a numeric sequence. On her 4th attempt, the screen flashed green. Access granted. "Gracias, abuelo," Isabella whispered, her fingers trembling as she navigated through the hidden server. What she found made her blood run cold. Emails between Carter and Myogen Corp executives dating back 18 months. Meeting logs. Financial projections. A complete strategy to tank Langford Global's value through manufactured crises, then acquire it through shell companies at a fraction of its worth. The maintenance technician scrolled through document after document, each more damning than the last. Carter had been planning this coup for years, positioning himself as the concerned son while systematically undermining his father's company. She found draft press releases announcing Carter as CEO of the revitalized company under a new name. The betrayal was complete and meticulously documented. Isabella's hand instinctively reached for her phone to call Philip, but she stopped. The tower was never truly empty. Security cameras, keycard logs. She needed to be smarter than that. She inserted her flash drive and began copying the files, heart pounding with each passing second. This evidence would not only clear her name, but expose Carter's entire scheme. As the final files transferred, Isabella thought of her mother, still recovering in the hospital. Maria had always warned her about the dangers of challenging powerful people, but her grandfather had taught her something else. That truth had its own power when wielded with courage. The young woman removed the drive and carefully logged out, leaving no trace of her discovery. Tomorrow, she would need to find a secure way to share this information with Philip. For tonight, she had what she needed: proof that the heir to Langford Global was its greatest threat. The night shift at Langford Tower had always been invisible, shadows moving through the building, erasing the day's traces. Now, under Maria de la Cruz's quiet leadership, they became Isabella's eyes and ears. The walkie-talkies that normally coordinated cleaning schedules transformed into an intelligence network spanning every floor of the corporate headquarters. "Third floor, clear," came the crackling whisper from Ernesto, who had worked alongside Maria for 15 years. "Security just finished their rounds." Isabella nodded gratefully as she slipped through the service corridor. Her mother had initially begged her to stop investigating, especially after the accident that had sent her to the hospital. But Maria's protective instincts had ultimately shifted toward action. If her daughter wouldn't back down, then she would ensure Isabella had every advantage possible. "Someone's coming," warned Luisa through the device. "Executive elevator moving up." Isabella ducked into a supply closet, heart pounding as footsteps passed. The cleaning staff had memorized the patterns of the night security team, the late working executives, and even the timing of the automated systems. This knowledge was their power, overlooked by those who rarely acknowledged their existence. Earlier that evening, Darius, who cleaned the executive floor, had overheard a heated exchange between Carter Langford and two board members. They were arguing about something called Project Ember, he'd told Isabella during their brief meeting in the basement. Carter kept saying they needed to bury it deeper, that his father could never find out. The name meant nothing to Isabella yet, but the urgency in Carter's voice, as described by Darius, suggested it might be connected to the EchoSeed files she'd discovered. Every piece of information was another thread in the tapestry of deception she was uncovering. "All clear on executive floor," came Maria's voice, still weak from her recovery but determined. 20 minutes before the next security sweep. Isabella moved swiftly through the darkened building, using her temporary access card to enter restricted areas. The alliance with the cleaning staff provided more than just information. They created distractions when needed, left doors accidentally unlocked, and ensured security cameras faced away at crucial moments. "Thank you," Isabella whispered into the walkie-talkie as she downloaded files from an executive terminal. "I won't forget this." "We see everything," Maria replied simply. "Now they'll learn what that means." As Isabella gathered evidence that would eventually expose the conspiracy threatening Langford Global, she realized something profound. The most powerful allies were often those deemed powerless by others. The invisible hands that kept the tower gleaming had become the very network that might save it from destruction. Isabella de la Cruz stared at her computer screen, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. The document that had just loaded confirmed her worst suspicions. Carter Langford's digital signature appeared on contracts with Myogen Corp. Dated 18 months earlier, long before the current crisis began. "This can't be right," she whispered to herself, scrolling through the confidential agreements. The son of Langford Global's CEO wasn't just involved with their supposed corporate enemy, he was actively partnered with them. The EchoSeed patent files revealed the full extent of his betrayal. This wasn't merely corporate espionage, it was calculated sabotage from within the family itself. Carter had been developing the technology jointly with Myogen while publicly claiming to champion Langford's competing version. Isabella downloaded the files to her flash drive, her hands trembling slightly. The evidence was irrefutable. The presumed heir to the Langford empire was systematically undermining it from within. She checked the projected valuation of the patent, $800 million at minimum, potentially reaching into billions with proper development. She pulled up financial projections showing how the sale of this technology would devastate Langford Global's market position while simultaneously enriching Carter personally. The young executive had created shell companies to mask his involvement, but the paper trail was there for anyone who knew where to look. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Tariq entered, his maintenance uniform slightly rumpled from a long shift. "You need to see this," Isabella said, gesturing him over. The technician leaned in, his eyes widening as he scanned the documents. "He's selling out his own father," Tariq muttered, shaking his head. "Does Philip know?" "I don't think so," she replied. "Carter has been careful. He nearly succeeded with that fabricated email that would have destroyed the deal with Myogen. If that had happened, Langford's stock would have plummeted." The pieces suddenly clicked together. "And then he could have bought controlling interest at rock-bottom prices through his shell companies," she continued, the horrifying elegance of the plan becoming clear. Isabella rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of this discovery. The betrayal cut deeper than corporate intrigue. It was a son willing to destroy his father's legacy for personal gain. "What will you do?" Tariq asked quietly. She closed the files and removed her flash drive. "I need to tell Philip, but carefully. Carter has allies on the board, and we don't know how deep this goes." As Isabella gathered her evidence, she realized the true battle was just beginning. The future of Langford Global hung in the balance, threatened not by external competitors, but by the very person meant to inherit it all. Philip Langford sat alone in his office, the city lights of New York twinkling below as he reviewed the amended succession documents. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. For years, he had groomed Carter to take over Langford Global, investing millions in his education and training. Now the truth was unavoidable. His son was not the leader the company needed. "Mr. Langford?" His lawyer's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "The changes you requested have been made. Carter remains the primary heir, but the new clause establishes Isabella de la Cruz as an official advisor with significant oversight powers." "Good," Philip replied, his voice betraying a mixture of resolution and regret. "Send it to me for signature immediately." The CEO swiveled in his chair, gazing at the family portrait on his desk. 20 years ago, they had seemed the perfect family. Himself, Carter, and Victoria smiling for the camera at their Hamptons estate. Now, his daughter was estranged, and his son was actively undermining everything he had built. Isabella had shown more loyalty in weeks than Carter had demonstrated in years. The young woman's intelligence and integrity reminded Philip of himself when he had first started the company. Hungry, principled, and unafraid to speak truth to power. These were qualities his own children seemed to lack. As he signed the documents with a heavy hand, Philip knew this decision would spark a firestorm. Carter would be furious, but keeping him as the named heir while diluting his actual power was the only compromise that might preserve both the company and what remained of their family. Across town, Victoria Langford received a cryptic text from a board member she still maintained contact with. "Your father just changed the succession plan. Some girl from the maintenance staff is now part of the executive transition team." Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her smartphone screen as she searched for information about Isabella de la Cruz. The daughter of the head maid? This had to be a joke. Or worse, manipulation. Was her father being taken advantage of in his vulnerable state? For the first time in 3 years, Victoria considered returning to Langford Tower. Not for reconciliation, but for investigation. This Isabella person was either remarkably talented or remarkably cunning, and Victoria needed to know which. Her family legacy, however complicated, was still hers to protect. Meanwhile, Isabella remained unaware of her new position as she worked late, combing through financial records. The power dynamics at Langford Global had just shifted dramatically, setting the stage for a three-way struggle that would determine not just the company's future, but the personal fates of everyone involved. Tariq Rahman sat in the maintenance room, staring at his tablet while security footage cycled through on the monitors. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. For 8 months, he had maintained his cover as a maintenance technician at Langford Tower, but his actual role as an insurance firm auditor investigating potential fraud was now compromised by his growing involvement with Isabella de la Cruz. "They'll pull me out if they discover I'm helping her," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his short black hair. The insurance company had placed him undercover after detecting irregularities in Langford Global's financial reports, the same inconsistencies Isabella had uncovered. His phone buzzed with a message from his supervisor requesting a weekly update. Tariq sighed, knowing what he should report, that the CEO's new assistant was investigating internal systems without authorization. Protocol demanded he document Isabella's activities and report them immediately. Instead, he set the phone aside. The maintenance technician recalled Isabella's determined face when she'd approached him 3 days earlier, asking for help accessing the building's surveillance archives. "I need someone I can trust," she had said, her eyes pleading, but resolute. "The people behind this won't hesitate to hurt my mother again." Tariq closed his security logs and made his decision. Using his maintenance credentials, he created a duplicate access card for Isabella and programmed it to avoid triggering the tower's automated security alerts. Breaking protocol meant potentially losing his job and professional reputation. But the evidence Isabella had shown him pointed to corruption far beyond what his firm had initially suspected. "Sometimes doing your job means breaking the rules," he whispered, echoing words his father had told him years ago. That evening, Tariq met Isabella in the empty cafeteria. "These will get you into the server rooms on floors 32 through 40, he explained, sliding the access card across the table. "I've disabled the motion sensors between midnight and 2 a.m. The cameras will show looped footage." "Why are you risking your position for this?" Isabella asked, studying his face carefully. The undercover auditor hesitated before answering. "Because I was sent here to find fraud, not become complicit in covering it up." He pulled out his tablet, showing her the building schematics. "There's a service elevator that bypasses the main security checkpoints. Use this route." As they finalized their plan, Tariq realized he had crossed a line from which there was no return. His loyalty had shifted from his employers to something more fundamental, the truth Isabella was fighting to uncover. "If we're caught," he warned, "I was never here." Isabella nodded, understanding the weight of his choice. "Thank you," she said simply. Together they had become unlikely allies in a battle against forces neither had fully anticipated when they first entered Langford Tower. Isabella de la Cruz and Tariq worked through the night, fueled by coffee and determination. Their relentless investigation had led them through a maze of corrupted files and falsified reports, but now the pieces were finally coming. Together, "Look at this access log," Isabella pointed to her screen. "Every manipulation originated from the same terminal." Tariq leaned closer, his eyes widening. "That's the executive floor. Terminal E12. Philip's executive assistant, she whispered, the revelation hitting her like a physical blow. They cross-referenced the timestamps with the building's entry logs. The assistant had been working late on precisely the nights when the sabotage occurred. It seemed impossible. This person had been with Langford Global for 15 years, trusted with the company's most sensitive information. But why? Tariq asked, rubbing his tired eyes. What could possibly make someone betray that kind of trust? The answer came buried in an encrypted folder. Isabella discovered a series of threatening messages sent to the assistant's personal email. The blackmail was explicit. Cooperate or watch as a long-buried family scandal became front-page news. These threats, she said, scrolling through the messages, they're all signed with a simple C. Carter, Tariq confirmed, his voice hollow with disappointment. As they dug deeper, the full scope of Carter Langford's scheme unfolded before them. The charming heir had created an elaborate network of shell companies positioned to swoop in once Langford Global's stock plummeted. The fabricated conflict with Myogen Corp was merely the first domino in a calculated plan. He's not just trying to damage the company, Isabella realized. He wants to tank the stock value completely, buy controlling interest through these shell companies, and then relaunch everything under his own vision. Without his father's name attached, Tariq added. The assistant had been the perfect pawn, someone with access to everything, yet invisible enough that suspicion would fall elsewhere. Carter had exploited this vulnerability masterfully, using the person closest to Philip as his unwitting agent. Isabella stared at the evidence on her screen, thinking of Maria, her mother, who had nearly been hurt in this power play. She thought of Philip, whose own son had orchestrated his downfall. "We need to move carefully," she said, downloading the evidence to a secure device. "Carter won't give up easily, and he still has allies we haven't identified." Tariq nodded grimly. "The board meeting is tomorrow. Are you ready?" Isabella took a deep breath. "No, but the truth doesn't wait for us to be ready." The corporate chessboard was now fully revealed, and it was their move next. The fluorescent lights of Langford Tower's server room cast an eerie glow as Isabella de la Cruz stared at her screen in disbelief. What she'd discovered wasn't just evidence of sabotage, it was corporate espionage on an unprecedented scale. "Tariq, look at this," she whispered, pointing to a cluster labeled innocuously as Archive 2022 Backup. They hid the entire financial AI system here, where nobody would think to look. Tariq leaned forward, his eyes widening. "They didn't just steal it. They reverse-engineered the whole thing and sold it abroad." His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up transaction records that confirmed their worst suspicions. "This links directly to those shell companies Carter established." Isabella nodded grimly. "And to Myogen Corporation. This proves everything." She inserted her flash drive, the same one that had started this journey, and began copying the critical files. The progress bar crawled forward agonizingly slowly. "We need to lock this down so they can't delete it remotely," Tariq said, already working to isolate the server. "If Carter realizes what we've found—" The young woman glanced nervously at her watch. 4:30 in the morning. They'd been working through the night, fueled by vending machine coffee and determination. In less than 5 hours, the board would convene for what Philip had warned would be the most important meeting in Langford Global's history. "How much longer?" she asked, pacing the narrow space between server racks. 20 minutes for the copy, another 30 to prepare the presentation." Tariq's voice was steady, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders. He was risking everything, his cover, his career, to help her. The maintenance technician paused suddenly. "Did you hear that?" They froze, listening. In the distance, the distinctive ding of the executive elevator echoed through the otherwise silent building. "Someone's here," Isabella whispered, her hand instinctively touching the outline of her grandmother's rosary in her pocket. "Security!" Tariq shook his head. "Security doesn't use that elevator, only executives." The progress bar on the screen reached 70% as they heard footsteps approaching. Isabella quickly dimmed the monitor and pulled Tariq behind a tall server rack. Another elevator ding, closer this time. "If it's Carter or his assistant," she breathed. "We're trapped," Tariq finished. The flash drive blinked steadily, collecting the evidence they needed to save Langford Global from its own heir. Isabella closed her eyes briefly, remembering her mother in the hospital bed, remembering Philip's trust in her. They couldn't fail now. Not when they were so close. The footsteps stopped just outside the server room door. The handle turned slowly. The boardroom's air felt electric as Isabella de la Cruz clutched her abuela's rosary in her pocket, drawing silent strength from the worn beads. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she stood beside Philip Langford at the head of the massive oak table. The evidence they'd gathered lay before them, digital breadcrumbs leading directly to Carter and his co-conspirators. "What you're about to see," Philip began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment, "will change Langford Global forever." Isabella activated the presentation, and the room fell into stunned silence as financial records, intercepted communications, and the recovered surveillance footage played across the wall-mounted screens. The young woman who had once been invisible to these executives was now commanding their full attention, methodically exposing the elaborate scheme that had nearly destroyed the company. "The Echo Seed patent was never meant to benefit Langford," she explained, highlighting transaction records. "It was designed as a Trojan horse, allowing Myogen Corp backdoor access to our entire financial system." Carter's face drained of color as his father turned to face him directly. "My own son," Philip said, the words heavy with disappointment, "working against everything we've built for 3 generations." "You don't understand innovation," Carter snapped, his charm evaporating. "This company was dying under your leadership." The executive assistant, seated in the corner, began to weep silently as Isabella revealed her role in the conspiracy. "She was blackmailed," Isabella clarified. "The evidence shows Carter threatened to expose her family situation unless she cooperated." Board members exchanged horrified glances as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. 2 senior vice presidents, longtime allies of Carter, attempted to leave, but were blocked by security personnel Tariq had strategically positioned outside the doors. When the presentation concluded, Philip stood tall despite the weight visibly pressing on his shoulders. "I take responsibility for the failures of leadership that allowed this to happen," he announced. "Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Langford Global." Gasps echoed around the room, but the older man raised his hand for silence. "Carter Langford is hereby removed from all positions within this company," he continued. "The board will appoint an interim leadership team while we rebuild what was nearly lost." As security escorted Carter from the premises, his face contorted with rage, Isabella caught Philip's eye. The older man nodded slightly, acknowledgement of her courage, her brilliance, and the unlikely alliance that had saved $900 million and the legacy of Langford Global. The company would survive, changed but intact. And Isabella, the maid's daughter who had dared to speak truth to power, had forever altered its course. The boardroom fell silent as Philip Langford slid the contract across the polished mahogany table. "Executive Vice President of Digital Security," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine respect. "The position is yours, Isabella. You've more than earned it." Isabella de la Cruz stared at the document, her fingers tracing the embossed Langford Global logo. The salary figure alone could change her family's life forever. Yet something didn't feel right. "I'm honored," she said, meeting Philip's gaze, "but I think we both know I'd be more valuable elsewhere." The CEO nodded slowly, unsurprised. In the weeks following Carter's ousting, he had come to understand. The young woman's principles? Isabella proposed an alternative, an independent technology ethics laboratory, fully funded by Langford Global but operating without corporate oversight, staffed primarily by voices from communities like hers, people with talent but without privilege. "The next whistleblower shouldn't have to be someone's daughter cleaning the offices at night," Isabella explained. "They should already be in the room when decisions are made." Philip agreed, signing the funding authorization that same afternoon. The lab would become his most meaningful legacy, far more significant than the skyscraper bearing his name. Maria beamed with pride when Isabella shared the news, her eyes glistening. "Your abuela would say God put you in that room for a reason," she whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand. 3 months later, Isabella stood before a group of teenage girls in the community library, where she had once taught herself to code. The space had been renovated with new computers and equipment, a donation from the Langford Foundation. "Technology isn't just about writing code," she told them, moving between workstations. "It's about understanding who that code serves and who it might harm." One girl raised her hand. "But nobody listens to people like us." Isabella smiled, reaching into her pocket where she always kept the original flash drive, now empty of data, but full of meaning. "They will if you make your voice impossible to ignore." Across town, the newly appointed CEO Victoria Langford reviewed quarterly reports. Her father's unexpected choice had shocked the business world, but Philip had insisted his daughter's outsider perspective was exactly what the company needed. On her desk sat a framed photo from the lab's opening day, Victoria and Isabella cutting the ribbon together, an unlikely alliance born from shared determination. Meanwhile, Tariq had accepted a position as the lab's security director, finally able to use his skills openly. And Maria, now retired with full benefits, volunteered teaching Spanish to the young coders, her own quiet revolution. The flash drive remained in Isabella's pocket, a reminder that courage, when precisely applied, could redirect the course of billion-dollar empires and ordinary lives alike.